Good afternoon, everyone. You're all very welcome to our Aware webinar this afternoon, the last webinar of 2024. My name is Dr. Susan Brannick, and I am joined today by Suzanna O'Reilly, a psychotherapist and relatives and friends group facilitator. So we're going to be talking about supporting someone with a mental illness. So what we'll do, just as people are joining, I can give you a bit of information about Aware. So for those of you who aren't familiar with our services, we have a whole range of information, education and support services that you can find out more about on our website, aware.ie. Both for people experiencing depression, anxiety, and related mood conditions, as well as those who support them. We also have a whole range of these webinars which take place on the second Wednesday of every month. So do have a look at our YouTube channel as well for our past episodes. Today we have an opportunity as well to ask questions as we go. So please do put any questions that you might have in the chat. We will try to get to them as many as we can. My apologies if we don't get to answer your question, but we'll do our best to answer as many as we can throughout the hour together. If you're left with any concerns or queries, maybe after our webinar today, do maybe speak to maybe kind of anyone in your support network, maybe GP if that's appropriate, or mental health professional. And as I said, you can find more information about our support services on our website. So without further ado, maybe to welcome Suzanna O'Reilly. So Suzanna is an experienced psychotherapist and trainer working in private practice in Marino Counselling and Psychotherapy Centre. Suzanna has a background in teaching. She's delivered our Aware Relatives and Friends program to groups since it began in 2017, and also volunteered for 2 years in the role of our Aware support group as a facilitator there. So Suzanna works with people with a huge range of experiences, maybe including anxiety, depression, and low mood. She has an understanding of how mental health difficulties can put a strain on relationships. She witnesses how both emotional and practical support can make a big difference to family members at times of acute stress and worry. So you're very welcome, Suzanna, this afternoon to talk about our topic today, supporting loved ones with mental illness.
Thank you so much, Susan. I really am delighted to be here and to be speaking on such an important topic to me and many people. I believe many people have registered and are attending and listening today. So I'm really hoping that this webinar brings support and insight and perhaps some reminders around well-being and self-care for supporters of people experiencing mental illness. So thank you, Susan. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Suzanna, for joining. It sounds like you're the right person to be speaking today in terms of kind of the impact of this. And as you say, the importance of kind of self-care and how this kind of might play out. And I guess as we were just talking there before we came on, this can be a challenging time as well for many people, can't it, in terms of the Christmas experience and kind of all the kind of stressors that might bring up both for people kind of living with mental health conditions and people supporting them, and for everyone generally. So maybe we'll talk a bit as we go through. I wonder, do you want to tell us a little bit, maybe we start off a little bit, if you tell us a bit about yourself and the relatives and friends groups that you facilitate here at Aware?
Well, the support program, the Relatives and Friends program, is absolutely fantastic. It was started in 2016 by Breed O'Mara and Dee Lynch. And in 2017, I started delivering the program. So I have maybe almost 8 years experience of witnessing what kind of change can happen when people have compassionate listeners in a room and a similar experience. So, you know, today's theme is around supporting someone with a mental illness. And that person might be a sibling, a parent, a friend, colleague, neighbor, somebody that you care about. And sometimes what gets lost is that you're impacted by it. You're impacted by the experience of witnessing. And also sometimes the relationship that you have might be impacted by it as well. So the Relatives program has very important coping skills and helps support people around communication, listening skills, and also the reminder of self-care and how important that is, so that you yourself are your best self in the relationship, so that you're supporting the person who has a mental illness, but at the same time you're taking care of yourself. And it's not selfish to do that, because a lot of feelings can come up in a room with people when asked directly, what's it like for you supporting your loved one at the moment? And the kind of range of experiences and emotions that come in can be difficult to articulate and difficult to talk about. But I suppose in my role, and also as a psychotherapist, I really feel that it's important to acknowledge feelings, and then we can, see how are we impacted internally, and even just to sit with that with other people, it can be very, very helpful then to actually find ways to cope and find ways to improve, your sense of where you are in the situation and how you can maybe seek support elsewhere as well if that's needed.
It's interesting, isn't it? As you say, there's something very powerful, maybe the word you used there was kind of empathic listening. And maybe that the benefit of that in a group setting as well. There's maybe a few things I want to pick up on what you mentioned, but maybe hearing other people. So it's not just you who's offering the empathy, but maybe other people as well. And I wonder if that can help maybe create a space, as you say, to acknowledge some of the feelings that come up in this. And oftentimes people kind of make contact aware or maybe kind of sort of seek help for the person. But as you say, there's also the you in it and how you're managing it. And sometimes that can be a difficult focus to kind of bring it to.
Yes. And we do say that at the beginning of the relatives program, Susan, if the loved one in your life benefits from you attending this program, isn't that wonderful? But the program Relatives and Friends is for you. So it's an hour and a half for 4 weeks in a row, for 4 consecutive weeks. So, 6 hours of sort of taking in information, sharing feelings, doing some exercises, and really being present to yourself. And I have noticed and observed that, there are family members who at the end of the 6 hours, the end of week 4, really feel empowered to support themselves more if needed. And they have a new awareness or perhaps a healthy reminder that they matter too. And that they're impacted in the situation, because it can be very difficult. They can be very exhausted. They can be very worried. They can really carry a lot of worry and fear around the well-being of their loved one and never had a chance to maybe communicate that to somebody else. And that's powerful as well, just to feel vulnerable in it, because perhaps the person in their life sees that strong supportive side, but that it takes something from them as well. So we use the analogy of, the car. Like if you're driving a car, you make sure that it has petrol and water and oil and that it's, gets its NCT done regularly. But as a person, what are we like around checking our own well-being, our physical well-being and our own mental well-being, so that we can be our best, strongest selves in the supporting role. It's important just to sort of think about those things as well.
Yeah, it's really important, isn't it? And I guess that sort of carries outside of the relatives and friends group, doesn't it? So it's sort of, even if you weren't attending this group or this is the first you've heard of it, I guess these are probably similar themes really, I think, that come up anyway for someone who is in whatever relationship, as you say, it might be a partner, sibling, child, might be a parent. And I think possibly all of those different relationships might bring up different challenges, mightn't they, in terms of your relationship to the person and how that pans out for the kind of their mental health challenges, doesn't it? So it's different kind of ways of relating to people might bring up a whole range of different emotions, really.
Exactly. And I think sometimes when it's a parent role, we worry so much about our kids and our adult kids if they're experiencing mental health difficulties. And even one of the very positive emotions that comes into the room is pride. When a parent witnesses, their child may be getting that place in college, having had, very difficult teenage years, perhaps around mental health difficulties, and maybe missed a lot of school, but managed, that recovery has meant that they got that place into college. And just that, pride is also something that we address. And when things are going well, when medication is the right, has had time to settle and the person in your life is doing well, it's important to be able to share that too and share that joy, that it's not all sort of negative worrying and irritation or frustration, but that it's really important to really access that part of yourself, that when things are going well, that you remember it and you know it and you savor it. And the pride comes in as well to supporting loved ones and seeing progress.
Yeah, I guess excuse me, oftentimes we get more focused on the negative, don't we? That's kind of human nature, but it's really important. I suppose that's a key part of resilience more generally, isn't it? The really kind of allowing the experience of those more positive emotions and crucially, as you say, maybe sharing them as well, and maybe sharing your thoughts and experiences around that.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also, you know, there's space as well for families to talk openly about, you know, what situations they found themselves in that were stressful, and perhaps relationships, you know, rupture from time to time because of stress and strain and worry. But, you know, we talk in therapy a lot about repair. So a lot of family members might need a little bit of external support to help them come back and talk to and work around communicating with their loved one about what it was like when perhaps things were really difficult. So that there is an opportunity to rebuild relationships. And this is an important thing to bring up as well, that, you know, that repair piece. I was hurt when, and I want to talk about that now that you're well, so that we can minimize it happening again. So that, you know, people are empowered within the relationships that they have with people who are experiencing, you know, difficulties.
Yeah. I guess there's something about communication there, isn't there? And I suppose, as you say, I think it's really important, that repair piece and how we might go about that. I suppose it strikes me maybe that, because there's different, maybe people will have, maybe even people kind of watching today are going to have so many different experiences. So it might be someone who's worried about a teenager. It might be someone who's worried about a parent, someone who's worried about a partner who has kind of a long kind of standing experience of depression, maybe, you know. So these are all really common experiences for people. And I suppose what the capacity for, I'm just thinking, maybe for a lot of people, actually, there may not always be an opportunity to have the full conversation with somebody. You know, as you say, in many ways, there may well be when someone kind of is in a period of wellness, but also that it's a possibility that might not always be an option, maybe. And I guess it's how we reconcile and repair and do our own work too, in terms of maybe conversations that it may not be possible to have for whatever reasons, you know.
Exactly. And I think, you know, just to be aware that compassionate listening is a huge positive thing for people who are experiencing depression or bipolar disorder, but it's also something that's available to their loved ones as well, externally, if need be. And so, you know, it's that the mental illness doesn't sort of consume the whole relationship, that both parties can get support and information from external sources and then come back together to work with it.
So it's okay to kind of bring that in. It's sort of the kind of facilitating maybe a slightly different space that might be harder to do, which may benefit all of us at different points or different kind of challenges that we might face.
Exactly, at different times. And it's just noticing as well, you know, that sometimes we, you know, in a caregiving role, we can offer active listening and empathy and support, but perhaps we might need some of that for ourselves. And it is a very relevant question, you know, who listens to you? And it could be in your role of supporter. It could be my family member, my other family member, my best friend, the person I do yoga with on a Tuesday night, or it could be, you know, a counsellor, it could be mental health professional. But it's important that, you know, there's more people involved. It's sort of widening the net of support around the relationship and around the family that facilitates that healing piece, that when things are going well, they can really be enjoyed.
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it? And I guess maybe what might come up for people, this is quite a common theme. I would see it clinically and certainly working in health settings generally, this idea of guilt around speaking about maybe some of the challenges and the strains of supporting someone, and kind of how I guess we respond to that, you know. And also shame potentially too. I guess guilt maybe in terms of feeling disloyal to the person, and maybe kind of experiences of stigma, so there is self-stigma or social stigma. It can be quite a complex area to navigate, and I think maybe sometimes people can feel quite isolated, can't they, in terms of
Absolutely. And I think we are social beings. We like connection. Communication is good for us. Connection is good for us. But we may not be able to do that from time to time. So yeah, it is really important to to know within yourself, you know, what feelings are there. Yeah. And it can be supportive to just, you know, we talk about mindfulness, we talk about taking time out to exercise, to go for a walk, to take a yoga class, to have healthy hobbies. But sometimes when you mention guilt, Susan, some people have said to me in groups, I feel guilty going to my yoga class if the person in my life is very unwell at home. And, you know, guilt comes in, sadness comes in. And sometimes, you know, when things are acute and very serious, it is wise to stop that yoga class or whatever that piece is. However, I suppose for where I want to come in today is that it's essential when things are getting better or on the mend or improving, that those hobbies that keep you well, that you reconnect with them. Yeah, without guilt, without shame, without guilt. It's like you're role modeling for your loved one that self-care is important. And sometimes that gets lost.
Yeah.
So we can be really connected, we can be really supportive, we can be really there for you, but we have to be mindful of our own well-being. Again, I know and aware we use the analogy of the oxygen mask as well, because, you know, on the flight, you need to look after yourself and give yourself oxygen first, so then you can look after others around you. And that's where I'm kind of coming from as well, with self-care for the supporter and for the caregiver, so that that's not lost. Because it's an important piece with mental health, that the family members are also potentially impacted to some level, and that they maybe need some support as well.
Yeah, and I guess the allowing that support, I think we all maybe have different relationships to help, don't we? And I guess maybe and certain roles that we might play in the family or in our close relationships. And I suppose it's sort of, and maybe whether it's a group like that in the relatives and friends, or whether it's your own psychotherapy, or maybe it's not even just personal reflection. If there's potentially a value in that in terms of, well, how am I with being a helper, but also getting help.
Exactly. And
and
it's
who
really
is.
Sorry for interrupting you there, Susan.
No, go ahead. Go on.
It's really good to notice that for yourself, you know, what am I like as a caregiver? What am I like? Do I want to fix something here? Am I taking too much responsibility here? What's it like for me? Is it all up to me? Or are there other family members or people that can come in and help from time to time as well? Or what is it like for me to receive help? If a family member offers to babysit for my children so that I can attend an appointment with my husband or my partner, do I say, no, I'm fine, and refuse help because I'm not comfortable in taking it? And then what happens is people stop offering, and then there's isolation comes in and frustration comes in as well, which is difficult to manage. So yeah, I think it's important to look at your own self in terms of how you receive help and how you offer help. And your sense of responsibility for looking after others as well. And with that kindness and compassion, like, it's coming from a good place, but it's like, if the situation isn't acute, how do I pull back? It can be really good to offer, you know, cooked meals and do so many things for a person in your life who's depressed. But when things are getting better, it's the certain questions have to be asked. You know, can I allow myself, give that person back their independence so that they're well able, so that I can now see that it's time for me to return to my cycling or my yoga or whatever it is that keeps me well. And it's really finding balance in that, Susan, balance for when, you know, things are changing and improving, how I manage myself in that.
Yeah. So it's maybe being able to be a bit flexible and adaptive maybe to the changing situation. And I think that, and that's not necessarily about the person, but it's about sometimes then we get kind of a bit more into that mode of being. So I do this dinner every week now, and that's what we do. And whereas we're actually, as you say, maybe it might, when things are kind of improving, there's a bit more flexibility in saying, okay, well, actually, how might that look a bit different for now? I guess this kind of communication sort of is one of the key parts in that as well.
Right, Susan, it all comes back to communication.
Yeah.
Being really clear around boundaries. And, you know, this can be difficult to negotiate over time, especially with illness. It's not easy, and maybe support is needed around those things. But very clear, healthy, sensitive, caring boundaries around yourself and the caregiving piece. And also the acknowledgement that the person in your life might be doing very, very well and might actually benefit from role modeling of you looking after yourself at the same time. in a compassionate way, without guilt. And the ugly feelings, or people say uncomfortable feelings rather than ugly feelings, that we deny. But it's like, how can we be comfortable in the role of supporting so that we're doing the job the best we can whilst looking after ourselves? It's such an interesting topic, but it's so important as well, Susan. So thank you for bringing that up today. It's really important.
It's crucial, isn't it, as you say, that the kind of communication piece. And I suppose a lot of just thinking about the kind of the time frame of some of this for people, I suppose a lot of the kind of queries that we might have or that come up are maybe communication in terms of when you're worried about someone. So this is an issue that comes up a huge amount, isn't it? So let's think about someone maybe who isn't already maybe in services, but maybe someone is really quite concerned about them. And the person themselves might have varying kind of, I guess, desire to talk about it, or kind of maybe might be in a different place maybe to the person who's noticing changes. And I guess I don't know what kind of I was just thinking back to your kind of empathy and active listening, and what kind of things come up for you in terms of maybe starting some of that difficult, might potentially more challenging conversation with someone that you're noticing changes in that feel a bit worrying.
Yeah, and it's a very important one, because sometimes it's the person close to you who notices when things are changing. It's the person who you live with, or somebody that you see regularly, and somebody you're concerned about. And there's utter frustration in the relatives groups where the loved one is not taking action, or visiting the GP, or checking out, they're not actively looking to improve, or and it's very frustrating. And it's like, as you say, how do you bring a conversation into the room? How do you negotiate that? I suppose it's important that if you are going to ask a question, that you're able for the answer as well. And that's important. But it's also the how you ask, an open question, rather than, because some people, ask very sort of yes, no questions, like and the answer, a very closed question, how are you? Are you okay? No. And the program will open into sort of asking more open questions. How are you feeling today? How do you consider speaking to your GP? And keeping it very open. But it's also important where you have the conversation. And people say, not at the family dinner table. That's not the place to ask questions around well-being and health. Is it about going for a walk where you're out in nature and both of you can respond in ways that, it's private, it's not in front of other family members? Or in the car? A lot of people say in the groups that they have their most interesting conversations with their loved one in a car, because perhaps there's nowhere to go when we're on a drive somewhere, or perhaps the family member is sitting behind, so there's no eye contact. But it's very unique and individual. Like, where do you talk? Where do you create the space for real conversations? And what's it like to ask questions and be very unsure about the answers? And sometimes family members are holding a lot of fears. I've noticed you're unwell, or I've noticed you haven't had a shower, or there's a change in your personal hygiene, or I notice you're not going to the events that you usually go to. I notice your mood has dipped. How do you, and where do you say those things? And then it's like, how can you encourage the person to go to the GP? And in a way we say, the GP is the first point of contact in terms of, kind of a gateway into all services. And it's like, well, how will I go with you? Can we go tomorrow to the doctor? And it's like offering that solidarity and companionship to go along. So there's a lot of support pieces that come into play, but it's about managing the emotion around that, because perhaps the person is feeling very agitated and very frustrated around it, and isn't wanting to do that. So that's where the family member who's doing the supporting might need more support as well from somebody else to help them with that piece.
So it's going to be harder to do that alone, maybe, and not to say, and many people are alone in it. I suppose many, we know, don't really, that there's many kind of couples or families that actually can be quite isolated. So again, it's kind of where you might get that support. There's a kind of reality to the diversity of people's lives, really, isn't there?
And it's very difficult. It's really difficult. And I'm sure many of the listeners even today would, there'd be many people who would have that lived experience of frustration and wanting to help. and the person not taking the help.
Yeah. And I think, as you say, it's really important, isn't it, to kind of go back a bit to what you were saying. This is one of the most crucial things. And again, this comes up a lot in the work that I would do, and certainly a lot of the kind of trainings around mental health more generally, this idea that really being in a place yourself where you might be able to hear an answer that could be hard, so kind of being mindful of your own self in that. So as you say, kind of thinking about the context. So maybe not at the dinner table, maybe also not when you're really stressed out, or you're kind of quite heightened in terms of your own sort of emotions or experience or worry. So it's about kind of grounding yourself and maybe tuning in, I guess, to your intention or your hoped for kind of outcome for the conversation. Is it just even to open up a space, and kind of allowing that, and as you say, the experience maybe of someone who might be feeling quite frustrated that the person may not be in a place yet to access help, or may not see it the same way that you do, or might not want to speak about it.
Exactly.
Or maybe not be able to speak about it the first time, but maybe coming back could speak about it another time. So it's holding
that's really
that.
important. That's a really important piece. It's timing, and it's timing for the supporter, but it's also readiness for the person themselves. And there's a huge, there's a piece around honoring that, honoring what it is you can do, and honoring what's out of your control as well. And noticing for yourself, what support, because sometimes our support is very practical, and sometimes it's emotional, and sometimes it's giving that person space and just sitting back. And although you may be experiencing frustration and worry, but it's like allowing that person to make their own decisions as well.
It's really important, isn't it? That kind of autonomy, that your own personal autonomy, that's crucial for all of us. So it's sort of wanting to support, but allowing the person in their own time too. And I guess that's a complex area too. Certainly with people's maybe someone with very severe difficulties. I'm just thinking maybe of someone who might be in a period of elation, who might not have the same level of insight they might have otherwise into what's happening for them. And I guess it's sort of how we might navigate that and how we might prepare for it in periods of wellness as well. And that being, I guess I would see that as being very collaborative where possible. So when this happens, how are we going to, address it together? Maybe what do you want me to do? What do you want me to not do in those periods?
And a lot of families navigate those pieces, Susan, when the person is in a period of wellness. And it's a collaborative, as you say, experience where a family member, may be appointed as a spotter. That's the term we use. But it's not a self-appointed spotter. The spotter has been chosen by the person who is experiencing the bipolar. And perhaps in families, the spotter needs a support as well. So there could be two spotters. So that when the person is showing signs, unique individual signs of not being well, that the first spotter can speak to the second spotter and say, now this is a time where we agreed we would sit down over a cup of tea and we would very carefully, with empathy and with clarity, express that there are two of us here, and we're both in your life and you've chosen us as spotters. We recognize those signs, those individual signs around change of mood. And we really think it's time now that we contact your healthcare professional, your psychiatrist, the person who's taking care of you. And there can be real support for the caregiver there that, this has been discussed in advance. And that helps.
Yeah. And I guess it's, as you're saying that, I'm thinking it's complex too, though, isn't it? Because we all have ways that we communicate with people in our lives. And maybe for many people listening, they might think, well, that's what you're both saying, that's all great, but actually we don't have that level of communication skill between us, or relationship that maybe allows that. So I don't know what you think about that. I wonder sometimes, in my experience, again, sort of sometimes those more challenging experiences can open up a new space for different ways to communicate. As well.
And it is very complicated and very complex and very upsetting and very sad. And there's a helplessness that comes in as well. And family members find that very difficult. I don't have the answer there. I would just be, in my work, I would be exploring at all times what's going on now. what's going on now, because the situation is changing. But it's like, it's honoring what it is you can do at a given time, and honoring that as family, as a group, you know, with more and more support around you as possible, so that you have a network of support around your loved one. But it's very difficult when your loved one is not helping the situation, or isn't wanting help.
Yeah, and I think that's probably say that a few times today, but I think that's really important, isn't it? The kind of the frustration and the worry and the anxiety and the fear that can come up when you are concerned about someone, but they're in that different kind of place to access help. And as you say, quite crucially, taking responsibility for what's yours and what is possible that you can do, and kind of as much as is possible, letting go of some of the other pieces as safely as possible too. Yeah.
And it is important to know that, you know, to understand as much about the condition as you can as a family member, and you know, to learn as much about it as possible, to be aware of what supports Aware is offering. And it's also important as well to know what medication is being prescribed and why. And sometimes fears come up around a family member not taking medication. And it's communicating that. I'm concerned that you haven't taken your medication. You know, what do we need to do about that? Those kind of things as well, you know, and being very aware of what needs your loved one has around support. I know I've witnessed in groups where family member takes the responsibility of offering the medication to the person every day, you know, because that's a job that they've decided that they're going to do. Or managing lifestyle healthy changes, like, you know, going for a walk every day, nutritious meals on the table, managing sleep times and sleep routines, trying to manage stress as best as possible, so that the loved one is not necessarily, you know, taking on too many other pursuits outside, you know, what they need to be doing, whether it's work related or studies. So there's a lot that family members can do, and then but still they can feel very helpless, because sometimes they feel that it's not enough as well. So again, and I know I'm speaking quite broadly because there's many layers to it, and each individual has a different communication style as to what they want to be done for them or explored. But it's about being, you know, open to information as well for everybody.
Well, that's great. Thank you, Susanna. So I think I'm just thinking, it's coming to some of the questions here, that was one of them. I'm not sure if you'd seen that, or if you just sort of instinctively went there. But I think it's an important theme, actually, that idea of if someone's not taking their medication, which I think you've sort of covered, or maybe is struggling to access help, as you said, there's kind of other supports potentially around that. It's an interesting idea, that kind of offering the medication. Again, maybe that kind of comes back as well to that, whether that's agreed with the person or not. So that I could see that going either way. So it's
respectfully agreed is really important in all of this. And the autonomy of the person, as we mentioned earlier on as well.
It's key. I think it's probably one of the most important things we have, isn't it? And it can feel like that's taken away through depression or anxiety, or, you know, it sort of feels like that's maybe at times for people when depression or mood or that might take over, you lose a bit of that. So it's important, maybe as supporters, where we can empower the return of it wherever possible, maybe.
Be encouraging independence as they're getting well, of course, and not overdoing things. But that's a very difficult road to navigate. So I don't want to make that sound like that's an easy thing, but it depends on the family member and how they're progressing. And certainly age profile is important in all of this as well, and what responsibilities are on each person in the family. And it's important as well to know kind of things about alcohol as well, especially coming up to Christmas as well, because, you know, each individual has certain limits around alcohol, and, you know, for some people avoiding alcohol is very helpful. For some people, you know, social situations can be very difficult around issues like alcohol and what's expected, and what, you know, especially at a time like Christmas. So I do know from the groups that I have worked with that family gatherings can bring great joy, great connection, and great support. But it's also important just to be aware of what other pieces might be coming in as well around, perhaps I don't want to drink alcohol tonight. It's not what I want to do. And just being respectful of the person who's making choices around that.
Yeah, I think it's an important point to make, isn't it? I suppose we're having a kind of a broad conversation about some of these general
Absolutely.
themes. And as you say, and I'd really want to emphasize, this is really complex. You know,
Totally.
relationships, family relationships are really complex. Mental health can be quite complex, and we're all individuals. So I suppose it's kind of broad sort of themes, but it's not minimizing the fact that these can be hard conversations, difficult emotions to feel, and there can be a lot of challenges, a lot of hope as well and positivity. But I guess
Absolutely.
it's not
Absolutely.
easy. I guess we don't want to say, oh, it's easy to have this chat and everything's going to be fine.
No.
There's a complexity to this, I think, that needs to be respected, maybe, as you say, and honored. And I think just coming to the question there was one there about Christmas, which is maybe you've also instinctively covered. So you're doing very well on the the questions as they come in. Let me see what else. Yeah, I guess maybe there's a couple in there about medication, actually. So I think there's something key maybe in what we said, as you said, the kind of support that you can kind of put around people, and it's different, isn't it? It's kind of partner relationship as opposed to maybe being a parent of a child. So there's going to be different responsibilities and sort of duties around that too, isn't there? So there's maybe different kind of avenues of, it's a bit different. Yes, or a sibling isn't taking their medication versus a 14-year-old, for instance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And exactly, every role, every family dynamic is different, and the roles age appropriate, of course. And and there is a difference in supporting, you know, your teenager or supporting your wife or your grandparent. Yeah.
And I guess the kind of, as you were kind of mentioning before, if it is maybe a younger person, it's about kind of connecting in potentially to some of the services they might be linked in. So it's broadening that support field, maybe, whether that's a CAM service or the GP or whoever they may be linked in with, maybe sharing that information, sharing your concerns as well, and seeing how you can best support maybe a younger person.
Yes.
Okay. There's an interesting one here. Maybe I think it's kind of a general theme again. So about supporting someone seeking help, but maybe not following through or trying things that have been maybe agreed or suggested in therapy or different services, and how the kind of supporter might overcome those feelings of helplessness.
It's a difficult one, Susan, and helplessness seems to come into all the groups. It's one of those feelings, you know, powerless, helpless, and it's like, but it's sometimes mirroring what the person in your life is experiencing as well. That, you know, those feelings are around, they're internal, and they're, you know, it's helpful to talk about it. But I think what you're saying is that the person isn't accessing support, is it? Sorry.
They're accessing support, but maybe not always kind of following through, maybe struggling to kind of, take.
So the following through piece is that comes up a lot as well. And, you know, all we can do is encourage and support, and there's a real difficulty in when another human being isn't doing what's right for them, and what plan is in place, if they're not following the treatment plan. There's complete frustration around that. But again, it depends. Is it a child? Is it you know, what is the nature of the relationship?
And yet it's going to be different, isn't it, of how we might respond to that. And I guess a similar theme, similar question on that idea, maybe of someone who doesn't have a mental health diagnosis per se, but might really be struggling, but they may not acknowledge that there's an issue. And I guess we've sort of covered that in a sense, haven't we? That idea, maybe this question is saying maybe the person keeps avoiding it, or maybe kind of sees it as being kind of related to other external factors, and maybe how to help someone like that who I guess when you have very different views of what's going on. It's hard, isn't it? And I guess there's something about kind of really normalizing how difficult that can be, and how isolating it can feel. As a starting point.
Very isolating. And is there a compassionate listener somewhere in the family or externally that can help with that? Because each individual, as you say, experiences things differently and views things differently, and might need support with looking at it through a different lens, or looking at the impact on aspects of their life. Yeah, whether what's challenging, is work challenging, is studies, is relationships, what's the piece that they need to look at more clearly to realize that there's something amiss.
Yeah. There's a question in here which I think is really important, and we had it on our list to kind of consider. I suppose this idea maybe in terms of, I think this is a broad topic actually. So in terms of, maybe this is a really common thing that comes up for people. So the fear of someone maybe having thoughts of suicide or self-harm. So kind of some of the kind of challenges around communication around that. And I suppose in addition, maybe someone who might have made an attempt, and how you might support in the aftermath of that. I know that they're quite different areas, I think, but maybe if we take the first one, because I think it is a common theme, isn't it? That real fear, and that someone might be in a very dark place, and how we might navigate that.
Yeah, and it's very difficult for family members to manage this piece, and it comes up in the group a lot. And it's like, what's your biggest fear? And a lot of people say the biggest fear is that their loved one might be thinking about ending their own life, or that their loved one may not get better, is the second biggest fear that tends to come up. But around asking a clear question to find out where the person in your life is at with their thinking, it's fearful. And some people are afraid to ask the question in case they're putting an idea into their loved one's minds, by saying, are you considering taking your own life? Is a very specific question. And they're afraid that if they ask it, that their loved one might think of it as an idea, that they weren't thinking about that in the first place. So that's a myth. You can't put that idea into somebody else's mind. However, asking the question takes away the fear, because you've asked it. And again, as I said earlier, it's about, finding the right context for asking the question and being ready for the answer. And it is interesting because in many of the groups, family members have shared the relief that their family member looks at them and said, no, it's quite common. No, I'm not thinking like that. I'm not feeling myself, or I'm depressed, but I want the pain to go away, but I'm not thinking of ending my own life. So it's the relief and sort of that awareness that a family member may have been holding that fear for a long time. So it's like, well, if a person's thinking about suicide, if that is the answer, extra supports maybe need to come in around, we can work with thoughts. Suicidal ideation is more common than people think. Most people at some point in their life have had negative thoughts, and perhaps they don't have a depression at all. So it's actually more common than people think. But at the same time, it needs to be explored. And, mental health professionals do this in their work all the time, exploring where the person is coming from, exploring the idea of it, exploring the thought. Thoughts are not facts, and there's a lot of space for a lot of work to be done on that. But moving back to the role of the supporter, the caregiver, the family member, not having that worry is huge.
Yeah.
But to answer the second part of your question, Susan, if a family member has actually been self-harming, or has, a history of maybe attempting or thinking about or having a plan in place, that's different territory then. And the family member can't hold on to that. The family member needs to take action at that point. And whether it's ring 999, A&E, very, it's like, it's a very serious situation that it's too much for a family member. So what we would be saying in the groups is that's where you bring somebody else in. That's where you hand it over to the professionals. This is not something that a family member can manage on their own.
Yeah, true. There's a kind of, there's so much in there that it's so rich, isn't it, in terms of what you've said. And again, it's a very kind of emotive area, as you say. It's certainly one of the biggest fears that we might hear.
Huge.
And there's something very helpful about asking, and it's such a common myth, as you describe, this idea that if I ask it, it'll make them think about it, and they hadn't thought about it before. But as you say, actually the evidence would say that when you ask, it creates a whole new space of being able to think together about where the person is at, and it sort of brings it out into the open. As you say, it might be no, not at all, or it might be, well, sometimes I do, but I wouldn't. So there could be lots of different kind of responses to that. And as you say, if there is
able to receive the response as well. is really important. And that's why the self-care pieces I was talking about earlier come into place, because you need a lot of stamina, you need a lot of well-being around you to manage these things. And to manage them effectively for yourself and for your loved one. So, you know, there are times when you have to be aware of, is this outside my control? What do I need to do now? This is too much responsibility. So it's important to know that as well.
And as you say, taking action if there's an immediate risk.
Yes.
And then I guess moving through that process, and that kind of question was sort of thinking about how to support someone in the aftermath. So I guess that's a challenging time for everyone too, isn't there? A lot of emotions to consider really about how that's for the person, the complexity of that, and for the relationship itself, and kind of difficult conversations to navigate. Again, maybe timing and context and compassion are really key here.
Compassion, the biggest one. And an attempt at understanding, because sometimes it's hard to understand, you know, and as human beings, we find ourselves in situations like it's incomprehensible. It's how do I figure this out? And that's when support or guidance or counselling comes into its own, when, you know, families realise that we need to widen the net of support around ourselves as well, because this is really hard.
And I guess that there's kind of specific organisations around that potentially. So Pieta offer that support, I think, quite specifically. Obviously we have, excuse me, kind of more general support at Aware, but as you say, maybe it's important to kind of maybe link into something. And the thing maybe that comes from the relatives and friends group, but groups more generally, there's something very powerful about that shared experience. So if you're a parent of a teenager who's gone through this, or it's a partner, to be able to have that space for you as well, to kind of think through, this has been the impact of us or me or our family, and to be able to kind of share that. It's sort of, it's not a DIY sort of thing, is it? It's kind of accessing that support, both practical and emotional, maybe, as you say.
And it's essential, Susan. It's essential over time as well.
You
know, it's not something that's very quick and over. You know, it can be kind of lifestyle choices, and it can be how we're going to manage this if it's a long-term piece. And it's really just honouring ourselves as human beings and what it is we need. And sometimes, you know, family members and supporters, they have a to-do list of all the things they have to do for other people, and they're not even on the list themselves. I just think it's important to just honour what they are doing, all the pragmatic pieces, but holding onto the emotional stuff, the worrying, and just that sense of, you know, being able to have a compassionate listener for themselves from time to time is very rich. And to take part in a support group, to be aware of what information is around, and not have all of the responsibility of it, I think. And that, I say that, and I hope I don't make it sound light, because people do have lots of responsibilities, and times when things are, you know, in crisis and acute, it can be very debilitating. But it's like, when things are going well, what can we look at here, so that to help us as a family or as a network of people, so that things can maybe, you know, be supported in a way that every human being in the group is keeping well at the same time. So we don't burn out, and that we reduce the frustration, things like that.
Yeah, that's key, isn't it? And maybe as we come up to this time of year, the importance of that, as we kind of started off in the beginning, the self-care piece.
Self-care, managing your own well-being, being mindful of it, at least. If you're not managing it well, that's okay. There's times when it's just too difficult to do so. But I think if you have an awareness of your own needs and your own well-being at the same time, even if it's, as I say, it's on a list, it could be number 10 on the list, my walk, my essential walk that I need every day for 15 minutes, you know, fitting it in, because it's taking care of yourself so that you're the best version of yourself to support the people in your lives. And living your own life, you know, as best you can in connection with the person who's experiencing mental illness. But it's just really important to look at all of the layers and all of the pieces with compassion and with knowledge, and just feeling empowered in that space.
Yeah, that's really important, isn't it? I'm just seeing someone there has made a very helpful suggestion, so thank you for that. Just again, thinking around the practical support on Safe Talk and Assist workshops. So they're for kind of maybe spotting signs of maybe someone having thoughts about suicide or self-harm. Well, it's more suicide actually, isn't it? So they're free. You can access them. So the Assist training, and therefore the Safe Talk, it's for members of the general public as well. So this isn't like a clinical sort of a thing. It's actually, I'm not so sure about how to navigate this. This is a kind of a course you can take. So definitely, yeah, having a look at those resources too. And we could probably kind of send out some with the email if people are interested. So yeah, so thank you for that. We're kind of coming towards the end. I think the broad themes of a lot of some of the questions I hope we've covered in terms of certainly around the medication, maybe struggling with different kind of views on the problem. Just kind of looking at this, one of these last questions here. I guess the themes of kind of isolation maybe and helplessness are sort of key, aren't they? And I want this to be a kind of not a wholly negative sort of a space either, because there's also, as you said, there's kind of being able to celebrate the kind of where pride comes in, and it's not just all about the kind of more negative pieces, even though we're speaking about some of the challenges. So inevitably it may well be a little bit, but I think there's something to hold on to there in terms of it not always being around the mental health challenge, perhaps, and sort of expanding that out too. I don't know if you want to add into that, Suzanna, in terms of
just the feeling that I just want to say as well is that, at the end of the Relatives and Friends program, when you see people genuinely feeling that there's a weight off their mind, off their shoulders, that they've shared their experiences. And, and I see transformation in my work all of the time. I see well-being, I see health, I see people restoring relationships and repairing relationships that, it's doable, it's manageable, it's there's a lot of positivity as well, but I'm also very well aware of the challenges and the journey. So just giving space to it and communicating effectively as best we can, it's just really, really important. But I suppose to finish, I just think that the self-care piece is absolutely essential and vital. And it's not about feeling guilty because you're looking after yourself at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess because I was going to say kind of probably one of the, if you were to say the kind of most important thing for you for someone to take away, but it sounds like probably that's maybe one of them, the self-care piece, and to enable you to look after you, but also to support in a way that you want to be able to. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Suzanna, for this really interesting conversation today. And I guess, yeah, kind of quite moving in a sense. These are really kind of big things, aren't they? And people are living them all over the country, and kind of going through in their different ways. So hopefully kind of to those listening, we've been able to kind of get to many of your questions. Hopefully it's been a useful conversation to hear. And maybe kind of just to think through some of the themes more briefly as we finish, so that you can register your interest if you are interested to the Relatives and Friends group. That's on our website. As we mentioned, the Assist training, Safe Talk, they're resources if you're kind of wanting to learn a bit more about how you might tackle some of those more difficult conversations around asking someone about suicide. As Suzanna mentioned, obviously there as well, if you're very worried about someone, there's kind of accessing emergency services. So there's kind of doing that too. The HSE website, the Your Mental Health piece, has a lot of information there as well about supporting people with mental health difficulties and also in terms of crisis. So I would maybe suggest if anyone's sort of left with anything, maybe that feels difficult or concerns that you think really need to be addressed, certainly speaking to a GP, mental health professional, or accessing that help. If anything's been brought up here today and you think actually maybe this does need attention, really, really inviting you to do that. And certainly if you're concerned about someone taking those steps. Okay, so as I say again, Suzanna, thank you so much for today. Really, really insightful and really helpful, I think, certainly to have this conversation. And yeah, best of luck next year 8, will it be then, for the Relatives and Friends? Yes, amazing. Yeah, it's great to have you, and it's great to get an insight into how that group works. So thanks for sharing your time and your expertise today. It's really, really appreciated.
Thank you, Susan and Siobhan. You're very welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. And then moving on to our webinar for 2025. So that will be on the 8th of January. We're going to be talking about the role of lifestyle in improving well-being. So hopefully many of you will be able to join us there. After we finish our webinar today, there'll be a survey that goes out. So please do give us your feedback in terms of your sense of the session today and any topics that you'd like to have covered. We read each feedback and really want to try to meet the needs of people who are listening. So yeah, I guess thank you to the people who join every month. Maybe thank you to those who maybe today is your first joining of our webinar. We really appreciate you coming along each time, and hopefully it's been useful to you, and wishing you all a very happy Christmas and restorative New Year. And we'll see you all in January, hopefully. Okay, take care.